Who are you following? Everybody is following somebody or something. Put another way, everyone is a disciple. The question is not, are you a disciple? It's who or what are you a disciple of? 2,000 years ago, Jesus invited his first disciples to come and follow me. And over the last 2 millennia, millions of people have said yes to Jesus' invitation. It's changed not only their lives, but the course of human history. But what does it mean to follow Jesus today? And how do we follow Jesus in our busy, digitally distracted, and increasingly secular cities? The Practicing the Way course is a primer on spiritual formation. It's designed to lay a foundation for you to begin a lifelong spiritual journey of apprenticeship to Jesus. Over 8 sessions, you will hear teaching from myself and other voices on spiritual formation. We'll cover things like what it means to be an apprentice of Jesus, intentional spiritual formation, the practices of Jesus, and more. Each week you'll have time to process together in conversation, and then we'll send you away with practices and spiritual exercises designed to get the idea of following Jesus into the muscle memory of your body. At the end of the course, we'll help you create your own rule of life and architect your ongoing life around practices and rhythms that slow your busy life down to find joy in God. Join us on the Practicing the Way course.
We did start our Practicing the Way series last week. It was a really great time together as we took some time just to sit in those words, the initial words that Jesus spoke to Simon and Andrew as he called them. He said, "Come and follow me." And we processed them and spoke about what they meant in the context of discipleship or apprenticeship to Jesus and following him. And Dave Luthi spoke to us about these 3 things as a part of an apprentice, 3 ways that we organize our lives in terms of things that we do. And they are to be with Jesus, become more like him, and to do the things that he did. Our life groups, our week 1 practice, not just in life groups, but as well as in life groups and as we left here individually, was to develop a daily practice of prayer. So finding a time and a place to connect with God. And I've spoken to many of you. Some of you found this really encouraging to do, just to really focus in and do. Others found it really challenging to do, and that's okay. That is part of developing our relational rhythms with being with Jesus. And so it's very encouraging to unite together and to have that time and that place where we connect with Jesus. The other thing to mention before we get started today is that, kind of like the State of Origin Decider, this sermon is kind of part 1 of a 2-part series. So just like we needed to watch Game 3 to see that very sad outcome, to get the full picture of what we're going to be talking about today, I would really encourage you to also come along next week, and we will get 2 sides of what it is that we are talking about. And some of the teaching that we go through today is going to be reinforced in our life groups as we go through Practicing the Way. I was talking to Simon Kennedy last week, who was worship leading this morning, and he said to me it takes 7 times before something will sink in. 7 times to put it in front of your eyeballs or to hear it. So it never hurts for us to have messages reinforced in our lives. I admit I've never been much of a TV reality show viewer. I think that again, this is my opinion, I think a lot of reality TV is pretty rubbish. But a couple of months ago, my family, we sat down, we actually started watching MasterChef together on catch-up TV, which was really great. You know, we could watch along at our own pace. For the record, I consider MasterChef a little bit more wholesome reality TV viewing. It's all about the food. Yes, there's a little bit of people drama, but it's not all the, deep-seated drama. It's a purist reality TV show. I feel like I always talk about food when I'm preaching lately as well. I don't know what the link is there. But what we found is as we, as a family, sat down and we watched MasterChef, we watched a few episodes which became more episodes, we got drawn more and more into the world of food. And what I noticed after a few weeks of viewing was that we started to think about food more as a family. We started to talk more about it. My children started to show this interest in cooking themselves. And I was like, where has this come from? But they were genuinely wanting to help out with meal preparation. And then, of course, you go to the next level when you watch MasterChef. The dish gets served on the table and your family members start to critique your meals. And may I say, I received the most feedback from my children, not my wife, so I have clearly got some work to do. But what we found as we were watching MasterChef together as a family, this cooking show shaped who we are. It shaped our appreciation of food. It shaped our thoughts about food. It shaped our desire to eat food. Just seeing what was on the screen was just like, we want that. And ultimately, it shaped our love for and of food. You could actually say, I think, the Angs have become a bit of a foodie family, although I'm not. We can definitely vouch for not being one of those families that takes a photo of everything that we eat before we eat it and posts it on social media. Haven't done any of that. David Luthi also mentioned to us last week and spoke about spiritual formation. And he spoke about the idea that when it comes to spiritual formation, it is not a Christian thing. Spiritual formation is not a religious construct. Spiritual formation is a human thing. To be human is for us to grow and adapt and change over time as we mature in our lives. And so the key question we're going to kind of frame our time together on this morning is, how do we change? We're just going to spend some time addressing this question. And to do that, we are going to look at formation. So what is formation? What are we talking about when we use this word formation? Well, formation is simply the process by which our spirit or our inner person is formed into a particular shape or character. So it's the process by which we are formed. It has to do with how our inner self is shaped and molded by all of the different influences that are around us. And that results in you and I being formed into people. The problem that we face is that most of our spiritual formation is unintentional. It just happens to us. And by unintentional formation, I mean the ways that you are being formed without any effort on your own behalf. This is all passive formation. There is nothing actively involved in it. Which is basically saying that you will wake up tomorrow, you will go about your daily life, you will drive past billboards, you will hear songs on the radio, you will engage in different habits, you will read what is happening on your phone, you will listen to other people speak to you and treat you differently. All of this stuff and more, all of these things will unintentionally form you without you having to do anything other than get up and go about life as you know it. Our passage or our verse that we are going to focus on this morning is from Romans chapter 12, verse 2. We are just focusing on the one verse this morning. We're going to spend a little bit of time parsing it out and looking at what it means. But if you want to follow along in your Bibles and have a look at what's happening both before and after this particular verse, feel free to open them. We will have the verse on the screen. This is God's word that is being spoken to the Romans through the Apostle Paul, and here is what it says. It says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, his pleasing, and his perfect will." This is one of the most well-known verses in the Bible, and here at this point in the letter that Paul's been writing to the Romans, he has spent time speaking to them about the gospel. He said, this is the reality of what the gospel means. And now he gets to chapter 12, and this is the point where he's wanting to really drive home to the Romans what a committed life following Jesus looks like. This is what it looks like. And here in this verse, he gives the Romans two options: to conform or to be transformed. Now, if we get our Bible nerd on just for a moment, the verbs used here, conformed and transformed, are in what is called the present passive imperative. Now, what does that mean, Dave, you say? It basically means this is a command to keep on doing something that you are already doing, something that is already happening. It's an ongoing process. Let's break it down further. Conformed, transformed. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. What is Paul talking about here? This pattern of the world. What's this pattern? Well, here he is talking about sinful, ungodly ways of living. He's saying that is the pattern of the world. The stuff that is not of God, those patterns, they are the patterns, the ungodly ways. It is actually the way that we were shaped and molded before we came to know Jesus personally. And the pattern of the world still tries to influence you and I, even though we know Jesus today. Do not conform or do not behave according to the ways of this world, but here's the other option. Instead, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Paul is here saying to the Romans, because you're a new person in Jesus, you should have a new way of thinking. And that new way of thinking is what should lead to new behavior that is not a part of the pattern of this world. So the call for you and I here that we take out of this is to renew our minds, to take on a new way of thinking that is actually not a part of this world, but a part of God's kingdom. See, when we change the way we think about something, we change the way we live in our lives. For those of you who have joined me in receiving a speeding fine before you receive that fine, you will drive a certain way. I don't know about you, but I know that after I've received that fine, I drive with a lot more care and caution than I have beforehand. And why is that? Because what's going on in my mind is actually changing my behavior as I am driving along. Two other things to note before we move on here. Number one, change is a process. Transformation does not happen overnight. If we want something instantaneously, which we're often told we can get, that might be all good and well, but the reality is we're going to be disappointed when it comes to transformation because it does not happen instantaneously. Our way of thinking does not automatically change. In fact, it's fair to say that some of our ways of thinking are so deeply ingrained within us that it will take a lifelong, dare I say, process, slow process even, painful process at times, to bring about change in our lives. I became a Christian decades ago, but I still struggle daily with being slow to speak and quick to listen. Just ask my wife. There are times where I open my mouth and I comment and I critique her and I offer my 2 cents worth when all I need to do is shut my mouth and open up my ears. And that is something that I'm grappling with, I wrestle with every single day. The other thing to say about renewal of the mind is an internal process. So Paul is saying that the very thing that will lead to transformation is God at work within you, changing the ways that we think, which leads to the change in our behavior. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean our behavior is always going to align with our thinking, and in fact, at times, we will do or be tempted to do the opposite of what God is telling us to do ourselves. But this is an internal process that is being spoken about here. And we're called to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. But the problem is we are shaped by so many things unintentionally in our lives. Just over the school holidays, we were having dinner with some friends, and these friends of ours have a teenager. And we were talking about words that teenagers use to describe things. Really fascinating conversation, actually. I'm going to give you a little bit of a vocabulary or a dictionary here. So we spoke about words like lit. Now, if something's lit, it is not on fire, it's amazing or exciting, according to a teenager. That's so lit, that's amazing. We spoke about the word slay. If you are slaying at something, you are not defeating a dragon, you are actually doing something exceptionally well. Salty. Again, you'd think it would be to do with food. Dave's been talking about food to start. No, salty. If you are salty at someone, you are bitter or you are upset at someone. That's what salty means. And the last one, thirsty. If you are thirsty, you don't want a drink of water. If that person's thirsty, you are desperate for attention. Now, isn't that interesting? I thought it was a fascinating conversation. It interested me because we get a glimpse into the world of how young people make sense of the world around them through their language. But it also made me then think and connect the dots a little bit more. I thought these words are made up originally by one person who then spreads that online or offline to smaller communities, who then spread it to larger communities. And before you know it, it's infiltrating teenagers across the Western world in schools and all other ways. In fact, it also made me think that I am dreading the day that my children come to me as teenagers and say something along the lines of, "Dad, you are so salty that I slayed you in that game of Monopoly, which means I'm so lit and you're so thirsty." I'm dreading that day. Jokes aside, it is not only the language that young people use. As adults, we too are influenced by terminology, by acronyms, by just language in so many ways and slang words across our culture. So I hope it's clear to see already that we are shaped by many things just unintentionally. And it happens at different levels, whether it's at an individual level, a smaller group level, in our culture, online, offline, across the world. This influence and formation happens. In the Practicing the Way book by John Mark Comer, he says, we do not get the luxury of a blank slate. There are forces within and without, with a vested interest in us not becoming like Jesus. Therefore, all Christian formation is counter-formation. And for the remainder of our time together this morning, I just want to speak to 3 key ways that you and I are formed unintentionally in our lives. The stories that we believe, our habits, and our relationships. They're the 3 things we're going to look at. Let's start with stories. We are told stories from a very early age. Stories take us on a journey, don't they? They transport us somewhere. They help us to empathize with others, to get alongside what is happening in the experience of that story as it unfolds. It is such an effective medium for understanding. There is, in fact, a reason why the Bible, the majority of it, is written in narrative. For you and I, we are told many different stories in our lives. We are told the story, more money equals more happiness. If I just increase my wealth and get more assets, then I'm going to be a happier person. We're told that story. We're told the story, success is defined by career achievement. If I climb the corporate ladder and do well at work, if I receive promotions and awards and bonuses, then I am a successful person. I am winning or slaying at life. We are told the story that your worth is attached to your outward appearance. So how valuable you are and how valuable others in society consider you depends on how beautiful or how trendy you actually look and appear to others. And we are told the story that failure is a bad thing. If you fail at something, that is a disgrace. That is a shame. You should not be doing that thing. When in reality, failure is just a part of growth and learning in our lives. These are just some of the stories that we are told. But if we believe these stories, if you and I just allow these stories to have any sort of influence on our minds, they will give shape to the people that we become. I want to talk for a minute just about exposure to stories. When I looked up the term in the dictionary, exposure, the first definition said this: the state of having no protection from something harmful. And I thought that was pretty interesting. The example here was the danger of being exposed to asbestos. Now, because change isn't instantaneous and it's a process that happens, the more that we are exposed to something, the more it is going to form us. Tech companies know this, marketing companies know this. You probably know this already. It doesn't hurt for us to hear it time and time again, because the reality is that this is what happens to us. If we expose ourselves to one particular angle of a story, we are going to be informed and formed by that one particular angle of a story. So if we just get our news from one source and we ignore all of the other sources, we are going to be informed by that one particular angle for that story. It's the same with all media, whether it's a YouTube that we watch, the channels we watch, whether it's social media influencers that we follow, the stories that we are told by them will form us. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't watch the news or use social media, but I am saying the amount of exposure that we give it has an impact on who we become. That's stories. Let's look at habits now. James K.A. Smith wrote a great book. You're welcome to borrow it from me at some point if you'd like. It's called You Are What You Love, the Spiritual Power of Habit. So he talks about how habit has a spiritual power in our lives. And he says our heart is the existential chamber of our love. And therefore, our loves and what we love direct us or orient us in a certain direction towards a certain end goal. And essentially, his argument is that your desires define what you want, therefore, you are what you love. That's his argument. I love good chocolate. Lindt is still my favourite, but can I just say I am very open to exploring other new potential favourites. And the way that you might tell me your favourite chocolate is you just bring me a sample and I will try it and I will get back to you and let you know if it is my favourite or my newfound favourite. There is a Lindt store at the DFO shops out near the airport. And every time I've been there, I've made it my mission just to go into that store and just walk into the middle of the store and just stand there and just breathe. And I just stand there and I just breathe and just inhale that sweet aroma of chocolate all around me. And it's just a beautiful experience to just stand there. But what I found is, as I've stood there each and every time, my love and my appreciation for chocolate just has grown and gone to a whole new level. And even though I know in my head eating too much chocolate is not going to be good for me, I still love it. In fact, the more that I eat chocolate, the more that I want to eat chocolate. The more that I read my Bible and pray, the more I want to read my Bible and pray. The less I do so, the less I want to. If we start the day reaching for our phones, first thing when we wake up, it's not going to take long before the first thing we do in our day is reach for our phones. The most successful self-help book in the past decade is called Atomic Habits. And guess what it talks about? It talks about habit formation. Good habits, how to make them. Bad habits, how to break them. Now, without even talking about good and bad habits and the difference, today we want to be aware that our habits form us. Our habits shape our loves and they shape our longings in life. Proverbs 4:23. Above all else, the writer says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And so in some sense, what you know in your head is actually nothing compared to the deep loves of your heart. I know in my head, if I eat that whole block of chocolate in one sitting, I'm going to suffer in different ways. I am going to, have a lot of energy, and so I'm not going to sleep well. I'm going to put on weight. I am going to have high insulin levels. I know that, but deep down in my heart, if my love of chocolate is so strong, it is going to override anything that's happening in my head. The good news for you and I is that we have a say in pointing our heart in the right direction, and that is what we are going to talk about next week. The third thing and final thing to talk about is our relationships. The relationships that we have with other people are deeply formational in our lives. And in fact, what I say now is very impactful to us, because your family is the single greatest relational influence on the person that you become. Now, this is good news for some of us. This is mixed news for most of us. This is terrifying news for a few of us. We become like the people we hang out with. I was just watching the State of Origin with my son on Wednesday, and I'm just aware, he's a little version of me in terms of the way he interacts with calling out to the refs, celebrating a try, applauding. All of the mannerisms, all of the actions are an identical replica of me, and that's because he's spent time with me and he's been formed by my particular actions and the way that I've expressed myself watching football. So family, we're formed by the relationships within our family. Friends are the other key relationships. The friends that you sit with, that you talk with, those people you are very likely similar to in many different ways. You're probably similar to your friends in the way you talk, in the way that you do life. You're probably similar in your preferences, whether it's voting or... The key one that I've found is when you go to a restaurant, you see two friends sitting down together ordering lunch, they often order the same meal. I seem to see that all the time. That's a key thing. People are like friends are like each other. They're even similar sometimes in the way that you dress. And that is because we become like the people that we spend time with regularly. And all of this, the stories, our habits, our relationship, it all happens in different environments over time and throughout our lives in terms of our experience. And all of this together forms you. All you have to do tomorrow is wake up, go about doing your life the way you do life, and the stories, the habits that you're involved in, the relationships that you enter into, the environment, the time, the experiences that we encounter, all of these things will form us. And so our apprenticeship to Jesus must offset this. If our real true self is actually found in the person of Jesus of Nazareth, who said, I'm the way. He said, I am the truth and I am the life. How is it that we become more like him? And we will look at this more as we look at intentional spiritual formation next week. And so, as renewed beings, we need to become aware. We must become aware of the patterns of this world, and we must be aware how they're actually shaping us. This is important. Our call, if we are to answer it, what Paul is saying here, to be renewed, our call is to become transformed through renewing our minds. And this requires us becoming aware of the things that are forming us unintentionally. So I want to invite you this morning just to ask one simple question of yourself, just where we are right now. And this, before I ask the question, this is a safe space. This is a space where we remember the compassion and the mercy of Jesus for us. This is a space where there's no guilt or no shame. And we need to remember that we follow a king who is full of compassion, yeah? So here's the question. Who am I becoming? Ask yourself that question. Who am I becoming? If you plot the trajectory of your life 10 years from now, 20 years from now, who do you see on the horizon? Is it someone who is becoming more like Jesus? Again, no guilt, no shame here. It's compassion. Looking back 20 or so years into my 20s, if I was to ask my 20-year-old self who I saw in my 40s, I would have probably said someone who measured success by all of the wrong metrics in life. Someone who was wrapped up in themselves, in living for themselves, in wanting more stuff for themselves. Who am I becoming? That's the question. I want to invite the worship team to come back this morning. That's the question we ask as we've just spent some time reflecting on these things. Our weekly practice this week is a slightly longer one. It's to take what is called a life audit, an inventory of all the forces that are forming you both now and into the past. Now, this life audit asks questions like, what habits make up my everyday life? What are the stories I've come to believe? And what experiences have shaped me into the person that I am right here, right now, today? And the audit is in your companion guide. There's lots of space within there for those of you who like to journal and write out a lot of answers in response. But John Sweetman has managed to condense the audit down to a single two-sided page, and you can access the condensed version by clicking on that QR code, or alternatively, we do have a hard copy available. You can take a sheet out on the welcome desk after the service and just take that away with you as a part of conducting this life audit. And can I really encourage you, this is something that I personally have found so beneficial to do, not just once, but to do periodically. So can I encourage you to actually make time? Don't find time this week. Make time. Put some time blocked out in your calendar this week to do this life audit and consider your habits, your relationships, stories, and everything else and how it is forming us. And then we reflect together and then individually and then come together in life groups before we meet again next week. So that is our weekly practice, and I will be praying along with many others. I'll just be praying that God in that time will just reveal to us with His grace, with His compassion and His mercy, reveal to us, each one of us, the things that we need to hear and see, and the things that are going to help us to become ultimately more like Him. Would you stand with me as we say a closing prayer together? We're going to say this out loud together as a church. And then after that, we are going to partake in communion. Let's pray together. Good Creator, who made our inmost parts, you see more of us than we do. You know us better than we ever will, and yet you call us beloved. Give us courage to see ourselves in the light, to be honest with who we are and what we're not, that in our being fully seen by you, we may be transformed ever more greatly by your love into your holy image. Amen.